the future in your hands. The only multicultural IPTV station that brings communities together. Over 2.7 million people have already watched. Go Live TV, anytime, anywhere.
Welcome to our first episode of Just Talks. I am your host, Sajanth Mohan. I have a few friends here with me today. If you guys can just introduce yourselves to the crowd.
My name is Anand Yaladi. I'm 33 years old, and I'm still single.
Perfect. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Jobin. I'm actually just recently married for about 2 years, going on 3 in August. Very excited to be here.
Hi, my name is Komi Thava. I'm also excited to be here, and I don't want to disclose my relationship status, but thanks for having me.
All right, so I think everybody's probably wondering, hey, why are they telling you about their relationship status? Well, today our first episode is going to be titled Relationship Status, because a lot of us, we are walking through life and we're in different seasons in our lives. Some of us are single, some of us are married, some of us are dating. There's all this stuff happening, and there's so many relationship status. When we look on Facebook and Instagram, it's complicated, it's all sorts of stuff. So I want to just talk to you guys today about relationships, because I think this is really important as young people to understand what relationship is and what it should be and what it shouldn't be, especially growing up as a Christian, as a believer, okay? And so I want to just kind of give you an outline of what we're going to be talking about, to give you insight into the few topics we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about singleness, we're going to talk about dating, and we're going to talk about marriage, because we want to make sure that as believers, as Christians, we want to be able to walk in the will of God in those areas of our lives. So, let's just maybe dive into our program today and just ask some questions that I'm sure most of you have, because there's a lot of things that we are not too sure about, and some lines we don't really know, and so we want to make sure today that we can maybe clear some things for you so that you can have a better relationships with those that are important in your life. And so without further ado, let's kind of dive into some questions, and then we'll continue with our conversations. Okay. First question. Okay. What are some rules for Christian dating that we have to have in our lives? See, when I say Christian dating, there's a lot we can pull from that, because it's like, what does that even mean? Why are you saying Christian dating, right? Because is there a difference between Christian dating? There's a difference between just regular dating? Because the reason I say that is because as believers, the foundation of our lives is based on our relationship with God. And so if we say we're believers and we have a certain way of life, then that should portray in all areas of our lives, right? Okay, so let's talk about this, because we're not here to judge anybody. We're not here to say this or that about anybody. But let's just talk about relationships and talk about singleness, talk about dating, talk about marriage, because this is like one of the most important parts of our lives that every single person kind of looks forward to in life, right? And so give me some, Jobin, give me some rules for Christian dating. What would that look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, I personally would say that in everything, mostly in our lives, God gives us a set of instructions, because, I wouldn't even call it rules. I would call it guidelines to just help us, because He wants the best for us, right? One of the things that just jumps right at me is in 2 Corinthians, Paul talks about unequally yoked. Now, every time we hear that, first thing that goes to our head is, oh, okay, I can't marry someone of the same religion. Actually, it goes a little bit deeper than that. And we have to also understand, what does it mean, right? And I think it's so interesting, so that we have to dissect it a little bit, right? So when Paul says this, he's actually talking about, the picture that he's trying to portray is actually about a cattle and moving something that's heavy. And the thing that holds it is actually the yoke. So one of the things that was very common in the civilization at the time was during farming season is that if you have a cow and a goat or something, it's not going to pull it. It's going to be unequally yoked. Same way, we can actually use the same foundation for our own dating life. And, when we look for someone, Paul says, let them not be unequally yoked. And something, we can go a little bit further into it. So what does unequally yoked, how does that look like in our relationships and so on? It doesn't just mean like, oh, I'm funny, he's not funny. No, that's not what he's talking about. It's talking about, do you have the same spiritual goals? Do you, when it comes to children, are you guys thinking about the same way of raising your children? Are you talking about when realizing, finances, things like that? Where do you feel that your purpose with God is?
Okay, so let me kind of ask you a few questions on.
Sure.
You said a lot of things there. Being unequally yoked, right? And so you said, do you have the same spiritual goals? Right. See, as believers, I think our relationship with God is probably one of the most foundational things that need to be established, right? And so, if the Bible says, "Do not be unequally yoked," especially young people. I mean, we've all been young, right? I mean, some of us are still young, right?
Still young.
Right.
I'm young too.
All right, guys, we're all old. Okay. All right. Listen. So, if it's so important. Right, and the Bible talks about being unequally yoked. As young people, sometimes we don't see eye to eye in some of those things. It's like, what does it matter? Why does it matter that they have different spiritual goals, or they believe in different things? Right? Why is it so important as Christians, as believers, to say, hey, we got to be equally yoked? Right? Why is that important?
I think it's a very interesting question. It's a good thing that we're getting deeper into it
because I'm sure that's a lot of the questions that young people are asking today, is because, hey, I want to be in a relationship, but what's okay and what's not, right? And what are some fundamentals? So what we're talking about today is, what are some fundamentals that as a believer or as a Christian we ought to have and say, hey, these are non-negotiables, right? See, there are things in our lives that we want for our spouse or for a mate that we're going to get married to, but I want to talk about things that are non-negotiables. Like if your relationship with God is so important to you, then these fundamental ones should be so non-negotiable that you would not think otherwise, right? Because Job, and you said this, right, that if you don't have the same spiritual goals, right, how does it affect other parts of your life?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things we can actually just think about it in a practical way. If you think about it, if my goal is that I die every day to myself and become more and more like Christ, but my partner on the other side feels that it's good enough that we just go to church, and my goal later on is that, I want to go out there and spread the gospel, but my spouse on the other side is saying, you know what, I don't know about that. This is not the Old Testament, whatever it may be. You see that God's purpose is kind of being hindered. Now, end of the day, you have to understand, what is the purpose in marrying? What is the goal? Like, I'm not saying that people of unequally yoked can't get married or anything like that, but the biggest key is that you have to work on it a lot more. And God gives us guidelines so that we don't have to go through all of that. It's not that the marriage itself is a mission field. It's something that should be rejoiced. It's something that should be enjoyed. Right. It's the purpose that God has in a way where He manifests His love between two people. And I think it's so important that people understand that.
Okay, good. Komi, give me a point. What do you think? Some of the fundamental things that being a believer, being Christian, that we need to look at when it comes to dating.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest things, and one of the biggest things we as Christians struggle with, is actually maintaining purity. And what I mean by purity is, not the world standard. I think the world has really put on this idea that purity means like being like 5 feet away from each other, Jesus in between at all times. But what it really means is like being pure in the eyes of God. Like he's the one that we're accountable to at the end of the day. And a lot of the times I feel that Christians have kind of put on this facade of like, let me just put down the check mark list, right? Like this is how I have to act in terms of being a pure Christian. But you're not accountable to your brother or sister in their comparison of purity. You're accountable to God. God is the one that we're living up to, and we're trying to strive to his excellence, his holiness, his righteousness. And as long as we remember that he's never a condemning God, he's not someone who shames you in your strife towards purity. He just wants you to be intimately closer to you because he has all these promises and these fulfillments, and that includes relationships. And relationships that are pure are beautiful and wonderful in the sight of God.
Okay, so I mean, like you've given me the greatest textbook answer, right? This is what the Bible talks about, being pure. But how do we stay pure? Like how do we obtain purity in our lives, right? Do I have to kind of check a couple of boxes, make sure that, hey, I'm limiting myself in this, and this, and this, and this, and this is okay? Like how far do we go? Because listen, being young, one of the easiest thing to kind of get into is things that are unpure, right? Especially sexually, right? Like these are the things that young people deal with, and then they feel condemned because, hey, I've crossed the line, I've not done this, I've done this, and sometimes it becomes a point of gloating, or sometimes it becomes a part of a shame part of your life, and you kind of internalize things, right? So how do you kind of reconcile this? Because is it easy to stay pure, and is it easy to live our lives the way the Bible talks about? Because hey, it seems like in today's culture, hey, we're cross culture, like we're going against the culture of today's society, right? Because it's okay to do this and it's okay to do that, and the world kind of says, hey, you know what? That's their sexuality. Don't interfere with that, right? But as believers, why is it so important to want purity?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a great question, because sometimes you hear in church, the culture of purity is being pushed on me, it's affecting me spiritually, mentally, and all of that. But the truth is, it's actually a dying culture. It's actually the current culture in the world that's actually growing to a way where you have softened up towards certain sin. And see, sin comes in creepingly slowly. It doesn't just come in one day, you're like, I'm going to commit this. It actually comes really slowly. And the thing is, nowadays, it's being acceptable to, when you hear your friends are having live-in relationships, or I'm not trying to condemn anyone, of course. And I'm just trying to say, like, the moment you talk about a biblical standard that God has set for us, it's kind of frowned upon, right? It's kind of looked down upon. And it's really, and I'm not saying that it is something that is easy to accomplish. It is something easy to achieve. But it is something that we can work towards, having certain boundaries and so on, working towards that. It is something that is possible.
Okay. So we're talking about, you just said the word boundary, but before we get into that, and you said purity culture. That's interesting, right? Because say our generations before us, they especially coming from a South Asian culture, we, things are not talked about and not, not really brought into the forefront because, hey, it's a taboo, right? You don't talk about those things in front of public, right? Like probably what we're talking about right now is like, oh my gosh, what the heck are they talking about? Because why? Because it's frowned upon, because sexuality is like, hey, it's a closed thing, right? And so what happens is that the purity culture tells you, hey, keep to yourself. Don't talk to anybody about that because that's a private matter, right?
That's what people say.
And then when somebody goes against what the norm of the culture is in those days, they're segregated, they're pushed away, they're judged, right?
Yeah.
And then what happens? They feel judged by the church, they feel judged by their parents, they feel judged by society. And so then they go find their belongings with the people that maybe they shouldn't actually be with. Right? And so, but the other flip side is this. Okay, so I'm gonna turn the tables here a little bit, right? So everybody has sexuality, right? Like how you internalize your own body and you how you understand your own body and how you work, right? So when the culture, to say the purity culture is pushed upon you, right? Does that affect somebody's sexuality?
I think it does. And it kind of goes back to like shame culture even. Like, because I think a lot of the times, you know, the world nowadays, it's like, it's either one extreme or the other. The one extreme is like, be pure, be holy, be innocent, be good, walk in a righteous way. And then the other side, which is like the very worldly side, they use sex and intimacy as like a tool to market towards your self-desires, like to promote like evil desires. And that's why you see these like these justifications and people kind of walking into like sex as if it's nothing. It's just, you know, one partner after the other. But God's intention with sex and intimacy, it's a gift. It's something that's like supposed to be cherished and honored because he wants us to enjoy the fullness of that, because it's meant to like really fulfill us in a way that only we can have with a covenant marriage. And I think sometimes we feel so like inclined to take that route because, you know, our friends are like talking about dating and how it's so romanticized, and you just want to fulfill the status quo that society has, and then you don't see what you're entering into. Right. So I think boundaries and limits are so important. Okay, perfect. And that kind of segue into something I want to talk about is setting boundaries, right? As young people, those that are, you know, that are single, that are looking for a relationship, those that are going towards dating or going into marriage, right? What are some boundaries that are important for you to be able to keep yourself in a certain boundary so that you keep yourself right before God, right? I mean, as young people, you know, do we think about that? Does the culture today, right? Do they think about, hey, do I need to set boundaries with my partner? Do I need to set set those limitations? Or is it okay? Hey, everybody does it, so why should I even think about it? Right? So I want to talk about a couple of boundaries, two different boundaries. Number one is emotional boundaries, and the second one is physical boundaries, right? Because emotional boundaries is kind of like the primary one initially, because that's where you let the other person into your heart, into your mind, into your life, into every part of what you do. You know, one of the things that you got to watch out for, and I think especially being young people, is, you know, how long are you talking to this person, right? How often are you talking to this person, right? And what time are you talking to this person? And more or less what's happening is what? You're talking to this person about 2, 3, 4 in the morning. Right? Again, see, listen, this is what happens obviously when, you know, you're pursuing a relationship. But if you're in a point where, hey, you want to know and do the will of God, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit later, but is really putting limitations in your life so that you keep yourself pure and right before God, so that you don't cross boundaries and lines that maybe you shouldn't be crossing at that time in your life.
I mean, I think first and foremost, I would say sex is a great thing. Sex is a good thing, and I think in church we don't say that. And
you mentioned you were married for 2 years earlier.
I'm married, and you know, sex is a good thing. And I you know, you think about it, something as good as sex, only God could have created it. And you know, His intention was actually, Scripture talks about it as it's a gift. It's a gift from God, so that, you know, we may share with your special someone and so on, right? And it's there's a purpose into actually sharing that, something about preserving that, right? And I think a lot of the times we hear like, oh, don't have sex, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But the thing is, God does intend for us to do a lot of the things in the right context. And I think there's a reason for that, right? You know, vegetables are good, but if you keep eating it, then you'll get sick. Like if it's only that the whole time, right? Like if you just eat, say for example, you eat carrot every day of your life, 3 times a day, it's not good for you. Everything has an order, right? God allows for,
right.
As a good parent, as a good father, He wants the best for us.
Right.
It says every good gift comes from the Father, right? And He gives certain guidelines on, you know, don't do this, don't do that. Do it right now, it's okay. You know, like He gives us, He knows, Scripture actually says that His thoughts are much higher than our thoughts, right? And I think sometimes we think we're like, I don't see anything wrong with it. It's not hurting me, blah, 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 like, but sometimes we forget, the long-term effects of it, right?
Right.
And I think that's a good thought that we should have, like knowing that, it's not that it's something that it's forbidden or anything like that, but in the right time, God allows it.
Right. And so, setting boundaries, Anand, I want to hear from you as well. Setting boundaries, especially if you're a couple, if you're working towards marriage and you have, committed to each other, setting boundaries is really important for you. Right, and these are things that you need to mutually come and have open conversation about. Because sometimes when conversation is not put out there, it's kind of like unsaid, right? And once you've fallen, it's like the pressure of doing it again and again and again is probably there.
Yeah.
Right, Anand, what's your take on it?
Yes, that's so true, Sage. In fact, we need to. First of all, you need to respect your the other person in the relationship, because setting a boundary is really important. And when people say no, respect that. And when it's no, it is no. Mm-hmm. And again, coming back to the cultivation about getting into, you need to yell towards getting married. Dating is really good. It's a gift from God. It is a really exciting time. And I say that, that because from where I come from, I come from South Asia, especially from India. Like you said, it's a taboo, and some of the people back home, they won't like it when I say dating is a good thing, and it's okay. But dating is a really good thing because you are finding out and pursuing someone who you would be living your rest of your life, like 50, 60 years down the line. But having said that, you need to pursue it within the boundaries.
Wow.
And you need to pursue it within the boundaries. And as long as your intention is towards going towards a marriage, you are on the right path.
Okay, so it's really understanding that both parties in the relationship is working towards his marriage.
Yes.
Right? So you're not just dating to date, right? Because I think that's the culture of today. It's like, hey, I'm going to just date and kind of see if things work out, whatever. But it's not. See, it's the mindset. Dating is okay, but it's the mindset that you're going in dating that kind of becomes the stickler, if you want to call it, right? It's like, hey, is your intention to be married? Is that where you're heading, right? Because that's important, right? And I love what you said, Anand, that dating is okay, but as long as there's boundaries that are set, right? So that you're not just doing whatever you wish and plan and want, but you are in direction, that you're going towards marriage, that you're committed in the relationship towards marriage. Now, the next question is, hey, just because you're committed, just because that, yes, I'm committed to you, and therefore, it's okay to have sex. It's okay to do everything under the sun, because we are in a committed relationship. Is that okay?
No.
No.
No, I mean.
Yeah, I think it's some of the little lies that the devil tells us. I think it all starts up. We all been dating. I mean, actually, for me personally, growing up, I never had to think about all this. I grew up with a dream where, like, I grew up in India. So my dream was, I'll be about 24 or something, probably have a proper job. And, I'm going to go see a girl. I'm going to get some tea, do a little eyes. And, okay, at that moment, I'm going to decide if I'm going to marry her, if she's going to like me or not, Sometimes dowries in play, whatever. Anyways, but, that was the mindset I grew up with. But then it's good that we talk about these things because it's healthy, right? And I think it's important that we really just communicate what is there and just, having that mindset. And regarding exactly what you said, is it okay now that I'm in a committed relationship? Is it okay to do that? Is it okay to whatever? I think devil kind of uses little things to just make it further. First it'll be like, I'm just going to hold hands. There's nothing wrong with holding hands. I can just hold his hand. It's okay, right? There's nothing wrong with holding hands. But, but in your relationship, it'll be longer. Then you'll think, I'm going to hug. It's going to be longer. Then you're going to lead to kiss. And then kissing's going to lead to something else. And then eventually, then it's just the heart, the flesh is weak.
Yeah.
and the spirit has to be strong.
Yeah.
I would say while pursuing
the flesh is strong.
Sorry,
and the spirit
flesh
is
is
weak.
strong. The spirit is yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important thing. Like, so I think it's every time seeking a relationship, knowing where the end game is.
Yeah.
Like, what is the end plan? I want to get married. I want to be committed. The next step is engaged, whatever it may be. But I think seeking God in everything you do is very important throughout.
Right. Good. Go ahead.
Yeah. I would suggest one thing is that you never put yourself closed between four walls. That's a danger zone right there. And and that's a suggestion for every young person who's willing to date and who is dating right now, is that within the context of dating, don't lock yourself between the four walls.
Wow, cool. Komi, did you want to say something here?
I just wanted to say this, but I think the biggest thing in terms of just remembering why you have these boundaries is that you don't look at the person as the pursuit. You look at them first and foremost as a child of God, a daughter or a son of God. So that honor has to be first above anything else. That you always remember their emotions, their well-being, and that's what you're trying to take care of first before your own needs and your own desires. So as long as you have that in your mindset, like naturally these boundaries will come. This upholding of goodness will come in us,
Okay, good. Well, thank you guys so much so far. That's some really good valuable information on dating and really pursuing a relationship towards marriage. We're gonna just take a couple of second break here. I want to just want you guys to watch a few minutes or a second, or how many seconds? About 48 seconds. 48 seconds of just some information about our ministry, and then we're gonna come back and then we'll watch we'll kind of talk about the rest of the topics and questions we have. All right, watch this, and we'll be back in a minute. All right, welcome back. I hope you guys are able to tune in to Encounter on Tuesdays at 2 o'clock. I'll be bringing the word there. So now let's just kind of maybe get back into some of these questions that we're going to go into about relationships and singleness and marriage and dating, because this topic is pretty interesting, obviously, to all the young people, but also pretty hard to kind of walk through some of this stuff that we go through when no one's around, or when we're trying to find our emotional balance through all of this, because it's not easy to find the right relationship, especially today. That's what they say, that it's harder to find relationship today than it was maybe 20 years ago. But I don't know. I think we all had our different battles. But but it's true. It's not easy, because you want to find someone that you can commit your life to, so that you can have a good, prosperous, abundant marriage. Okay, so let me kind of go into the next question here. How do we cherish the season of singleness in a society that puts pressure on marriage? So how do we actually really understand what singleness is and cherish those moments of being single in a society that really pushes and puts pressure on this goal, like this ultimate life goal or something, of being married?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the main things to realize is that why are you getting married? What is the purpose of it? Paul makes it very clear that each one may live their life according to what they have been given, right? And when we seek God, and when we seek God in marriage and so on, what is the purpose of it? And one of the things that is important to realize that it is such a great thing to have. Some of the reasons might be, you're fighting temptation, you should get married, or you want a partner, you don't want to be alone in life, you want to have children. There may be many reasons, but when put in perspective of the gospel, Paul, who says, husbands, die for your wives, submit to your husbands, all of the, Paul goes on and on and on, and all of this, but Paul, in respective of the gospel, he actually says, spend more, like, the relationship, like, you should spend so much time with your wife. Actually focus on the gospel. For someone who actually seeking God and really loving, you should love God and, hate your parents, your wife, your brother, your sister. And you can kind of see, in respective of it, it's not a big deal. If you're thinking of eternity, it's such a short time that we're actually married. So I would say that you have to understand what is the purpose of it. In this little time, maybe understand, even after marriage, even after you get to heaven, you don't even remember your spouse. And it's like, you know who they are, but it's not, you're not married to them in heaven or anything like that. It's just a short time that you're here.
Right. Good. Wow. I'm going to come back to that, but Komi, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think a season of singleness is actually something we need to cherish because it's the most time that we have to give to God. There's no distractions, there's no mortgage. I mean, typical standards of life. There's no situation where you're like having to come and get the approval of another person. Right. Everything is just you and God. Everything you do, every daily walk that you have, you're really getting an opportunity to just have that intimate relationship with God. So I think when God ordains singleness upon you, don't take it as like, this is, I'm doomed and the goal of marriage seems so far away. It's also a beautiful thing. It's a time for you to reflect on yourself and your relationship with God as well. Right.
Okay, so singleness, you enjoy the time of being single. So what I heard from and I want to hear from you in a second too on it. Enjoying the moment of being single, because you can do all the things that you want to do and but those that are single are like, when am I going to get married? Right? When am I going to find my spouse? It's not, I think we've all been there and we've all, crossed that walk in our lives where we're like, hey, where is my significant other? When are they going to come in my life? Right? When are they going to come? When am I going to start my life? And this is it, right? That society enforces that, hey, life starts after marriage. Right? And so what happens is that we focus our lives on this moment, right? Because, getting married to the right person is very important. And so, we're waiting 20, 30, 40 years to get married and, and you're wanting to get married, but it's like, but this is your life's goal, right? Like that marriage is life's pride's possession. That this is what you're working towards. This is the climax of your life. Or it's like, hey, after I get married, I can start my life, right? That why does society put that type of pressure on people to say, hey, life only begins after marriage?
Yeah, pressure is real, Sage. Remember, when you go out there for parties, in the families, especially this older, part of the family. It's like, oh boy, this guy's still single.
And I think, and it's a cultural thing, right? It's a cultural thing. And, parents are always, worried for their children and all of that. And they want to make sure that they're getting married. And I understand that. And I think there's validity to that. There's obviously some importance of that. However, it affects our identity. Right? It affects the way we think, the way we feel, the way, what society puts on us to say, hey, how old are you? Oh, you're 31? Oh, you should get married soon. Right? And so the community, right, puts this type of pressure on us to say, hey, you should be married by a certain age. Now, today, people are getting married much later and all of that. But see, it's not about just being married. It's not about finding that person. It's really about finding your identity in Christ, that, hey, who you really are in him, being content with the stage that you're in. That's what the question was, how do you cherish the season of singleness when there's so much pressure that's coming from society to say, hey, you should get married. Hey, your biological clock is ticking. No, I mean, these are valid things. At the same time, the purpose of our lives is much greater than just being married. Now, being married is a part of life that needs to happen based on your interests, your desires, and the things that God has planned for you. But it is not the be-all, end-all, because you can lose yourself in all of this and say, hey, I just want to just get married and have kids and buy my house and buy my car and have this white picket fence and live a life that's saying, hey, is that all we're living for? Is this all that life is about? No.
No.
Right?
Yeah, and I think one of the, like you said, the social pressure, society pressuring you, even in movies. I remember just growing up seeing, like, I think I wanted to get married since I was like 6 years old. I remember like the end game of every Brown movie is that they get married and that's it. They've won life. Like, that's it. And I remember going to school. I'm like, I got to get good marks so I can get married. Like, it's like, what is the purpose of it? You're just running, chasing after it. See, all of the society, all the pressures, never look at ourselves. Like, what does God have for me? What is our end goal? Paul talks about this marathon that we're in. It's not a sprint. We just continue living in that. But it's like, at least we have a purpose in Jesus Christ. And I think sometimes we forget about all these things and just focus on ourselves. Things that, oh, I need that wife and she has to be perfect, or I have to have this husband. He has to be tall, dark, and whatever it may be. And I think that it's something that is so, if you really think about it, it's just kind of shallow in ways, because you're trying to fulfill whatever you can through another person.
Right.
So, right, you kind of think of, fulfilling your thing with some other person. But again, what I want to say is, this time of singleness is really important. Right. It's really important because, you have to pursue God even before getting into some relationship. You need to be grounded in God, because this is the best time for you to see God and, find your grounds with God. Again, what I say is, for all the people out there who are still single right now, is that, the longer you're single, the deeper you be with God.
And you get to spend more time with God, right? Okay, let's go on to the next question here. Okay, question 3 is, there's 2 schools of thought when it comes to this, okay? In terms of finding your right spouse. Number 1, this is a famous question, right? Is, does God have an appointed spouse that he has chosen for us to marry? Okay? And secondly, the other school of thought is, we have a choice to decide in whom we want to marry, right? Now, if you don't understand the will of God, you'll be like, what kind of question are you asking? It doesn't make sense. Right? But how do we reconcile the differences between these 2 things? That, hey, does God have somebody prepared and planned for you? Or does God allow us to say, hey, you can choose the mate that you want? What do you guys think?
I mean, personally, for me, I believe it is God's will. And, there's a lot of thoughts regarding it. But personally, for me, I believe it was God's will. In my life, I felt like everything was just orchestrated in a way where, it had to be God's will. Like, one of the things that I go back to in Scripture is actually just the first book in the Bible where we see God creating Adam. And, he has a job, he's working, and God actually notices something in him before Adam himself realizes. God says, I feel like Adam, it's not good for him to be alone. Right? God is the one who sees that first before Adam does. So, Adam goes and looks for, Scripture says, he goes, tries to find a friend and with the monkeys and the hippos and so on. But he was not able to find it. Later, in the Scripture it says that while he was sleeping, all he had to do was rest in God while God is at work. And it is just such a beautiful story for me, because God did all the work. He orchestrated everything, and it just came to play. I could say in my life, I would say that, I can say, oh, I planned it, I did this, I did that. I met my wife in high school. I saw her walking by, and I thought in my head, I was like, I feel like I'm going to marry her one day, honestly. But, nothing happened actually for like 3 years. Then later, I was I was doing another course at another city, and I just happened to see her, and things started rolling. We started talking, and every little thing, I felt like it just flowed. And God was in the middle of this, and so that's why I believe that there is a purpose. It's Bible actually talks about it. Every good gift comes from the Father. And it says, the one who seeks the wife seeks the good things and find favor in God's eyes, right? And so I personally believe it is God's will.
Okay, so I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I think, some people have different sort of opinions, right? It's saying, hey, God doesn't make you a robot, meaning that, hey, he's given us free choice and free will to be able to decide who we want to marry and when we want to marry and how many kids we want to have and all of that stuff that life brings, right? But sometimes it's interesting when we hear your story and say, hey, yours is very specific, right? And, my life, in particularly was very specific too. It was very ordained by God, if you want to call it, right? Ordained and purposed by God. But most people's lives that we know, right, are like, man, how do I just figure this thing out, right? Like, we have a whole list of things that we want and a whole list of desires and all of that. And so how do we take your story and we say, hey, man, that seems like God, right? And then we hear other stories. It's like, man, that's such a mess to be in, right? Okay, so let me just kind of share something, right? We know Abraham, right? Abraham had a promise, and the promise was that he would bear a son, and that's where his lineage of his entire life would come, right? Or his future would come from. And so, Abraham obviously was old, and he couldn't bear a child right away, or Sarah couldn't bear a child. And then finally, Abraham got tired of waiting. See, a lot of us, right, like, young people that want to get married, it's like, man, how long do I wait for this person to come? And so what do? We start looking at dropping some of our requirements, saying, hey, that's okay. They're not a believer, but they are godly enough, right? Or they are, man, they're so much better than Christians out there, right? Forget Christians because, man, I've tried them all and they're like not good enough. And so what happens is we like Abraham, we drop our standards, or we drop some of the things that are important for you and God, especially your relationship with God, right? And then we try to fulfill God's promise our own way. Now, doesn't mean that, hey, when you get married to the, I don't want to say the wrong person, I don't want to say that, right? But say you get, you choose your own mate, right? You're not asking God. You said, God, I will decide because you've given me the free will to decide, and that's fine with me. And you decide your own thing, whatever, just like, Abraham did with Hagar and all that. And Ishmael is produced, and Ishmael comes up in his life. Now, is God going to not bless Ishmael? Of course he is. Of course God will still bless you because you are his children, right? But does that mean that his promises that he has given Abraham void? No. See, what happened, obviously we're not talking about having kids here, but we're talking about marriage. But Abraham then, God fulfilled the promise over his life about Isaac, and obviously his life was unfolded, and we read that in the Word. However, this is what I believe, okay? This is what I think, okay? My life was very specific, and so I understand that, hey, God has appointed, right? But I believe that God leads us along the path towards the people that God wants us to walk into, right?
Create situations,
right? He puts us, because we desire his will. The Bible says, delight in the Lord, and he will grant the desires of your heart, right? And so God then brings the right people around you, around your paths, so that you may walk in those paths of righteousness, and in those places God will bring the right mate that he has prepared for you. And he does this so that you decide that this is the mate that God desires, because obviously there's different requirements and all that, and God sees our hearts with that, right? And so it's not that God then, obviously for me it was very particular. God had given me a dream and all of that, and it was very specific. But at the end of the day, it was my choice to say, hey, follow the conviction of the Spirit in my life so that I may walk in the will that God has prepared for me, so that I may fulfill what he wants with my life and my marriage. See, marriage is not the ultimate goal. Marriage is the journey that you will take to fulfill the purpose of God in your life, right? Amen. So he says, hey, you need that mate, just like you said, right? That Adam needed a helper. Adam needed that person with him so that he may fulfill the mandate that was over his life by subduing the earth, right? So that he may fulfill the plans of God. See, marriage is not the end goal. Marriage is not the climax of your life. Marriage is the strength that will come in your life to be able to do what? Fulfill the mandate that God has prepared for you.
Yes.
Right?
That's right. Yep.
Okay, so I know this is a big topic, and we can go rounds and rounds with it because there's so much that we can talk about that. But let's go on to the next question here, okay? Sure. Okay, why is it, okay, this is important, okay? Why is it important, or how important is it to understand your spouse's, we're going to talk about marriage a little bit, your spouse's family when it comes to your marriage and your expectations? How important is your spouse's family when it comes to what? Your marriage and your expectation. Jobin, I know you're married, so I'm going to get you to go first.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for picking me. I'm joking. No, it's actually a very easy question. I think in my life, I personally believe it's a union between husband, wife, and God. And I believe God is in the center of every marriage. And I understand, family is 100% important, and, they're part of it. They're an extension of it for sure. But, Scripture makes it clear, a man and woman, when they get to the right age, they leave their parents, they come together, become one flesh, and it's them and God. And God has a purpose for that.
Okay.
And I think a lot of times we think about marriage and we're like, oh, you know what? I'm going to get with this girl and this is just me and her. This is our life versus the world, right? But it's actually it's actually you and God and your spouse walking together. That was God's desire for marriage.
Wow. Wow. Komi, what do you have to say about that?
I think that Jobin's 100% right. I think it has a lot to do with you, your wife, and God. But at the same respect, like, family is community. Like, God intended us to be a family with him even. So him even giving us like a glimpse of family in our own lives is, I think, is something we need to cherish and honor. Like, our parents brought us into this world, and yes, it does say scripturally, you leave your mother and father and you're united with your spouse, but I think at the same time, like, blessing and promises are fulfilled through you, but it also extends to your children, your parents, and your generations that go after you. So those things are important in God's eyes. He wants us to understand that family is important.
For sure.
I say that, out of the abundance of love you have for your spouse, that is where your love flows from, the love which you have within your marriage to the relatives and, the family is extended. So I say first, build a culture of love within your marriage, and, everything flows out of your marriage. If you love your wife, you'll love their family too.
That's good. I mean, thank you guys for sharing. So this is what I think, right? Marriage within your, like, just between you and your husband and wife, right? The couple, you are building your culture, your family culture, right? Sometimes we know that, hey, listen, man, when you get married into somebody's family, like, man, you got drama, right? Oh, yeah. Like, families are messed up, right? Everyone's family comes with baggage, different baggage. And sometimes, you become very, like, ashamed of it in some sense. Say, hey, I kind of will leave my family out of it. This is just me, my wife, and I type of thing, right? And so we tend to leave our families out of the marriage. And some people, now this is the opposite side, that some people bring in family too much. Wow. Right? There's
touch some nerves here.
Right? Sometimes you bring in the family so much, and sometimes people, like, totally disregard their families. Both of which are wrong.
Yes.
Right? Number one, I think the union between a husband and wife is sacred, and that whatever happens in the house happens in the house.
Yes.
Right? No one needs to know about it. But then how do you, as the in-law, interact with your spouse's family? Because that's important, right? You got to understand that, hey, you didn't just, and especially in our South Asian culture, you're not just marrying into, that relationship. You're marrying into the entire family, meaning, hey, everything comes with it. Everything comes with it, right? And so really understanding the family, understanding the culture, and, hey, making sure that, hey, you're not offended. Checking your heart, right? Because a marriage is between you and your wife or your husband, and not you and the entire family. The family doesn't have to do with what's happening here, but it's important to understand how to manage their expectations, how to manage what is in the family, keep your family unit sacred. At the same time, know how to interact and become very sociable with your in-laws, because I think it's important. I think is really, for the sake of your spouse. Right? For the sake of one another, you got to know how to manage the expectations that are there with your in-laws, because that's very important. Okay? All right, so let's just go on to the next question. I know we're running out of time here. Next question is this. Is it okay to date someone who is not spiritually as mature as you? Can't we just help them grow? Can we change the person that we're dating to become marriage material? Can we change the person that we're dating to become marriage material? What's your thoughts?
Personally, I think there's a couple of thoughts that come to my head right away. If you believe in spiritual maturity, and you think like you're looking at the other person, you're like, oh, this person might not be that spiritual mature as me, or I want it to be, and so on. Right away, you have to notice one thing. These are early stages of your relationship. You have a couple of options. One, this is God telling you, hey, that's a red flag. You don't need that. Two, this might be you trying to make that person into whatever that you want them to become. But
okay, hold on a second. I want you to expand on some of these points here.
Sure.
Like, are you trying to change, and this is something you want to ask yourself, right? Even those listeners out there, are you trying to change the person that you're dating with to become who you want them to be rather than who God actually made them to be?
That's exactly the point I was getting at. Sometimes it's our own flesh. Oh, I believe that I want this guy to be this way or this girl to be this way. But realistically, that's not what God intended for each of that person to be, right? They could have different goals, different personalities, and so on. And sometimes we kind of mix that with spiritual maturity. And I think we need to kind of define that. Like, do you feel, and if you feel that in your heart, and I think we have to ask those questions. Now, there's another side to this, which is that, God still wants you to marry this person, and you're looking at it, but you have seen a couple of things that this person does not have equally as you are. So maybe your heart regarding your money is that you want to bless children. You want to give, 20% of your income to poor kids and to the church and so on, for mission field and so on. But your spouse or your spouse wants to use that money for furniture or something like that. You can see that you can see in the future that could be a problem. You can see, I want my children to be raised up in the Lord and, the way of God and so on. But your spouse tells you, you know what, actually, I think they should come to that own conclusion. I don't believe the whole, you should train up a child when they're young. You can see certain problems, certain red flags. And I think that's God allowing you to see certain things,
Right.
and just kind of making a decision from there on.
Okay. So, see, sometimes, as young people, what they do is they kind of go to the boundaries of living their lives to say, hey, as long as I'm in the boundary, I'm okay, right? Like, hey, as long as this guy or this girl is a believer, hey, I'm good. I can get married to this person, right? And you touched on spiritual maturity because I think that's important. Right? Saying it's not just about, hey, checking the fact that, hey, as long as this person is Christian, then I'm okay, right? That I can get this person saved, this guy saved, or this girl saved, and then I can marry them, and I'm in the green to get married, right? But that's just the beginning stages. That's like the fundamental thing. Sure. However, what about things that are not seen? What about maturity? Right? See, when we say that we're going to get into a relationship with somebody that is not as mature as us, that what we're entirely doing is that we're jeopardizing our relationship with God, saying, hey,
Is it worth
I'm okay to make this guy grow. I'm okay to make this girl grow in quote unquote God, right? So that I can have this person and I can jeopardize my relationship with God, my own relationship with God, because what's going to happen when you marry someone, or when you're in relationship with someone that is not in God, is that you're jeopardizing your relationship with God for the sake of hoping that this guy or girl will eventually get saved. That they will eventually become marriage material because I am interested in them, I like them, I love them, and my emotions, right? Because I didn't keep any emotional boundaries, are so infatuated with this person that I want this person, as long as this person has a check mark on being saved or a Christian. And it's not enough.
Yeah.
I think that actually also reflects a person's character. Like when you desire and you want spiritual maturity, it actually shows, it exemplifies like what your relationship with Christ is, because you are already on this journey. You're already like making stride, and your intimacy is growing and growing. So why would you want to give that up? Why would you want to compromise that for anyone? Not a single person should be a reason for why you're stepping back and taking like 2 steps back in your journey with God. But I do want to ask this one thing, which is, you know, I understand the idea of like falling for someone who's like a lukewarm Christian, someone who's not necessarily in the faith completely, maybe comes to church once or twice a month. But what about those who are newly finding the faith and they have this zeal and they're full on for God? It's just they're not at that spiritual maturity that you might be at because of the years and experiences that you've gained. What do we say about that?
What is the cost? That's
Yes.
what you're asking.
Yeah.
Is it worth it?
Yeah. And you know what? In those particular circumstances, of course it's okay, right? But the opposite of that is saying, hey, listen, yeah, you can go to church, you can do your church thing, you can, do your singing, you can go to do all the Christian stuff, but listen, I'll just be here. You do your thing, I'm okay with that, I'm cool with that, but that's not my thing, and so, you can do your thing, I'll do my thing, and then we'll kind of get back together, right? That's a whole different stake. Right? But then if that person, other person is saying, hey, I want to be with God. I want to have this experience with God. I want to learn. I want to grow. I want to, and shows the fruit of these things in their lives, we can know that, hey, they're walking towards that. Right? And that's okay. Right? Because there is a fruit that comes from the intention that you have in your heart. And the fruit comes by bearing the things that are talked about amongst your relationships, right? And so, okay, going on to the final question very, very quickly before we close here. Broken relationships can cause a lot of pain, right? We can be, gone through a lot of hurt in our life. How do we deal with these broken relationships in a godly way so that we're not affected the way that we may be, right? And what's the difference, if there's a difference between dating and being married, right? We have like 2 minutes.
Okay.
All right.
I think when it comes to broken relationships, a lot of the times we're stuck in the situation. We're stuck in the hurt. We're stuck in the pain. We can't let go of the person that like put us in this like painful situation. And I think God tells us, I have something better for you, but you have to release them. Unless you release them, you're just going to take on this baggage and you're going to carry that to the next relationship. And it just becomes a cycle and a mountain that just keeps like, growing and growing. And you never really release that pain in you. And all you really have control over is yourself and your own actions. So, reflect, ask God, Lord, show me the things that I've done wrong in my past broken relationships, so I can be a better person for the one you're ordaining for me, the one that you're waiting to give me, because I don't want this mistake again. I don't want to go through this path again.
Yeah, especially with, broken relationships, what happens is, when people, have a broken relationship, they tend to get the feel-good thing, they just try to hop on to different branch, and just to get the feeling that, in a relationship or whatever, right? But again, within this process, you're actually broken.
Right.
You're not complete.
Right.
The thing is, you need to detox yourself. You need to work on yourself. You need to be grounded in God, and only God is the one who can actually heal your problem.
Right.
And once you're you fix yourself, then you can move forward.
Okay. Well, I mean, listen, that's all the time we have for today. But listen, it doesn't matter where you're at today. It doesn't matter if you're single. It doesn't matter if you're dating and hurting, or it doesn't matter if you're in a marriage and in whatever position you're in today either. But it's never too late to come to God and say, God, I need your help, right? This mess in my life, I don't know how to fix it. This being single, it's kind of really hard. I'm in this relationship and I'm not sure where it's actually going. Or I'm married and my life's a mess. Things are not in place and things are not the way it should be or wanted to be. And my spouse and I are not really getting or seeing eye to eye on things. Come to God today. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what position you are in. It doesn't matter which area of your life you're in today. If you would come to God and say, God, I need your help, right? He is there to listen. He values the relationship that he has with you. And so if you would come to him today and say, God, I can't do this anymore. I need your help. I need you to lead me. I need you to guide me. I need you to be able to help me manage this whole thing and help me learn to find the right person. Help me walk along the path of righteousness so that you, oh Lord, can bring the right person into my life. Because when God brings the right person, yes, life is not going to be all beds of roses, but life would be meaningful. Life would be purposeful. Life would have a definite reason and a meaning for what God has prepared for you. Because marriage and relationship are part of the journey towards the call and purpose of God over your life. And so I want to just end this program by saying, hey, if you want to begin a relationship with Jesus, if you want to say, God, come into my heart and just forgive me of my sins and all the things that I've done wrong and everything that I've gone wrong and change me and help me live a life that is pure and right before you, just come to him today and say, God, forgive me of my sin. I come to you today that you may lead me, guide me, and walk with me the rest of my life and even into eternity, because I believe you died and rose again in Jesus' name. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope we hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back next time with another show with another topic, so that we can kind of just talk and kind of go through the walks of life together. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and again, thank you guys for being here with me today.
Thank you, Sage.
Thank you, Sage.
This is our family.
This is our life.